They thought I was destroyed when they cast me out. They figured their secrets were safe and that I, the family's ghost, would just fade away. But for 10 years, I wasn't fading. I was sharpening. For 10 years, I wasn't a victim. I was a student, learning the art of a war they didn't even know they were fighting. This isn't a story about forgiveness or trying to find my way back into a family that was rotten to the core. This is the story of how I waited a decade to burn their world to the ground with nothing but the truth. It's the story of the slow, psychological collapse they never saw coming. The night it all blew up started with the suffocating scent of my stepmother's perfume, a sick mix of lily and lies that clung to everything in my father's house. He wasn't just my father, he was Richard Sterling, a name that echoed through the financial district with a respect usually saved for gods or monsters. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. To me, he was the judge about to pass sentence without a trial. He stood there, his face a mask of disappointment I knew all too well. Beside him, my stepmother, Catherine, put on a show of fake sorrow, her hand resting on his arm. And my sister, Clara, the golden child, stood just behind them, her face a perfect mix of confusion and pity. They were a perfect picture of a concerned family dealing with a problem child. A masterpiece of BS. The money for Clara's wedding venue. My father's voice was low, every word a stone. It's gone, Alara, from the safe in my study, the same safe you knew the combination to. I just stared at him. My brain was scrambling to catch up. It was insane. I hadn't been anywhere near his study. What are you talking about? I didn't take anything. Catherine's grip on his arm tightened. A single, perfect tear rolled down her cheek. Richard, darling, maybe she's just confused. The pressure. I'm not confused. My voice cracked in the dead silence. I looked from my father's icy glare to Catherine's pathetic acting. I didn't do it. Why would I do that to Clara? I turned to my sister, my last hope. Clara, you know me. You know I wouldn't do this. Clara wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the floor, her silence my death sentence. It was all the confirmation my father needed. In our family, my successes were just another Tuesday, but Clara's smallest wins got a parade. My word against her silence was worth nothing. My father stepped forward. I have given you everything, Alara. A home, a name, an education, and you repay me with common theft. You have embarrassed this family for the last time. He didn't yell, he never did. His anger was a cold, dense thing, a black hole that sucked all the air out of the room. Pack a bag, you have 1 hour. Then you will leave this house and you will not come back. You are no longer my daughter. Each word was another nail in the coffin. I looked at their faces one last time. My father, the man who built my life, was now tearing it down. Catherine, the snake, was loving her victory. And Clara, the silent partner whose cowardice was the cruelest cut of all. I wasn't a person to them, I was just a mirror they smashed because they didn't like what they saw. And in that moment, a cold, quiet thought formed in my mind. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't grief. It was a promise. You will all regret this. The first year was a blur of cold rooms and colder truths. At 20, I was kicked out with one suitcase and whatever I was wearing. The family name that once opened doors now slammed them in my face. The story was set. I was the unstable, thieving daughter. When I tried to call or email, I was met with a wall of silence. They had completely erased me. For months, I just drifted. I worked jobs that left my hands raw for barely enough money to rent a room in a rundown house full of strangers. Some nights I cried, not out of self-pity, but from pure, burning rage at the injustice. I replayed that last scene over and over, picking apart every word, every look. Catherine's fake sadness, Clara's averted eyes, my father's chilling final words. The lie was so obvious, so sloppy, but they bought it because it was what they already believed. Alara, the problem. Clara, the prize. The wound was deep, but what they didn't know was that for every tear I cried, I was laying another stone in the fortress I was building inside myself. The turning point wasn't some big, dramatic moment. It came quietly on a rainy Tuesday while I was scrubbing dishes in a greasy spoon diner. My hands were raw, my back ached, and through the grimy window I saw a family, a father, a mother, 2 daughters, laughing as they ran through the rain. And just like that, the wildfire of anger inside me cooled and hardened into steel, into purpose. I realized I had been looking at it all wrong. I didn't want back in. I didn't want their forgiveness or their dirty money. I wanted them to understand the truth. And not just about the stolen money, but all of it. All the little lies, all the fake smiles. I wanted to hold up a mirror to them they couldn't smash. That night, I went to the public library and started planning. I wasn't a lost girl anymore. I was a researcher. My subject, the Sterling family. My timeline, however long it took. So began my decade in the shadows. While they celebrated holidays, I was in night school, first getting a paralegal certificate, then slugging my way through an online degree in forensic accounting. Every cent I didn't spend on rent or ramen went to my education. My life became two-sided. By day, I was a quiet, invisible admin assistant at a small law firm. By night, I was a hunter, hunched over a second-hand laptop, building my arsenal. My first break came from a weird bit of nostalgia. I remembered my father's old partner, Arthur Vance. They'd built Sterling and Vance Holdings from nothing. But Arthur had retired suddenly when I was a teenager. The official story was bad health. I remembered Arthur, though. He smelled like pipe tobacco and kindness and taught me how to play chess. His departure never felt right. It took 6 months of digging through public records and old social media posts, but I found him. He wasn't in some sunny retirement community. He was in a tiny, run-down apartment 2 states away, working as a hardware store clerk. A ghost, just like me. I took a bus to see him. When he opened the door, he looked a decade older than he was, with the same haunted look in his eyes that I had. I told him who I was. At first, he was tense, on guard. But when I told him what my father did to me, something in his eyes clicked. Recognition. Over bad coffee in his cramped kitchen, he told me the real story. There was no generous buyout. My father, Richard Sterling, had cooked the books, inventing losses to devalue the company until Arthur was almost bankrupt. My father used Arthur's own secrets, a gambling problem he was trying to fix, to force him out for pennies on the dollar, making him sign an ironclad NDA under threat of total ruin. He didn't just take the company, Alara, Arthur said, his voice raspy. He took my name, my life's work. Arthur had kept everything. Binders full of the real ledgers, emails, notes. He'd held on to them not because he hoped for justice, but as a reminder of what a fool he'd been. That night, he gave them all to me. I'm too old and tired to fight him, he said, his hands trembling as he passed me the dusty box. But you have his eyes, but your mother's fire. Maybe you can do what I never could. That box was my Rosetta Stone, the first skeleton from their closet, and it was a big one. It taught me the language of my father's lies. For the next few years, I used that knowledge as my key. While they went to galas, I cross-referenced LLCs in the Cayman Islands. While they vacationed in the Hamptons, I traced wire transfers through shell companies. My father hadn't just cheated his partner. His whole empire was built on fraud. He was a master of the game, but he'd forgotten he taught me the rules. Next up, Catherine. My stepmother always acted like she came from old money. Her past was always a carefully constructed fog. I hired a private investigator with money I'd saved from 3 years of barely eating. He was a grizzled ex-cop who didn't ask a lot of questions. What he found was gold. Catherine, born Catherine O'Malley, was the daughter of a con artist from Boston. She had a juvie record for fraud and had left a trail of broke men across 3 states before reinventing herself in New York, where she met my rich, recently widowed father. The PI even found her estranged brother, a bitter bartender in Queens, who was happy to spill for a few $100. He described a sister who was a sociopath in stilettos, who could fake love as easily as she could forge a signature. He even gave me a name, her first husband, a guy she'd cleaned out and left with nothing. And then Clara, sweet, perfect Clara. My anger at her was different, mixed with a sad kind of pity. She was a product of their system, a pampered doll in a gilded cage. I almost left her alone. But for my plan to work, the entire foundation had to crumble. The secret I found about Clara wasn't about malice, it was a tragedy. And it was hidden where my father would never think to look, in my own mother's past. My mother died when I was 10. A sudden illness, I was told. But digging into her medical records, which I got through a contact at the law firm, I found things that didn't add up. The timeline of her illness made no sense. The final piece of the puzzle came from my mother's old diaries, which I found in a box in my grandmother's attic. My grandmother, who passed away 2 years after I was thrown out, had never believed my father's story. In my mother's elegant handwriting, I read the truth. She hadn't been sick. She had been depressed. She'd found out about one of my father's early affairs, and it broke her. But there was more. A terrible secret she swore to keep. A secret about my sister. Clara was not my father's biological child. She was the result of an affair my mother had, a lonely mistake made after my father cheated on her. He found out, and he agreed to raise Clara as his own, not out of love, but as a weapon. It was the ultimate leverage, a secret he held over my mother's head for years. It explained everything: his coldness, his conditional love, why he showered Clara with gifts. It wasn't affection, it was a performance. A constant, cruel reminder to my mother of what she did. It's why Clara was the golden child. Her existence made my father look like a saint. My mother's sudden illness was a soul-crushing depression she never recovered from. My father hadn't just neglected her, he had psychologically tortured her to death. Reading those words, any bit of childhood innocence I had left died. This wasn't just about being thrown out. This was for my mother. This was about a lifetime of lies that destroyed our family long before I was gone. My decade in the shadows was over. I had every skeleton, every ghost, every buried truth. The storm was ready to hit. Executing a 10-year plan takes patience. You can't rush a psychological collapse. It has to be orchestrated, piece by piece, building to a devastating finale. My revenge wasn't going to be one big explosion. It would be a series of controlled demolitions, designed to make them tear each other apart long before I showed my face. It all started with a single, anonymous manila envelope. Inside, I put a few of Arthur Vance's old ledgers, just enough to show clear evidence of tax fraud from the company's early days. I didn't send it to the IRS. I sent it to a notoriously stubborn investigative journalist at the city's top financial paper. I watched from afar as the first crack appeared in the Sterling Empire. The journalist's first questions were subtle, but I knew my father. He'd see it as a declaration of war. His public image was everything. The slightest hint of scandal would send him into a panic. His days filled up with lawyers and PR teams. The pressure started to build. He got paranoid, short-tempered. The perfect patriarch was starting to unravel, and a man under pressure makes mistakes. Next, I targeted the heart of the family, Richard and Catherine's marriage. Using a burner phone, I sent a single email to my father. The subject line was simple: "Do you really know the woman you sleep next to?" In the email was a link to a private blog I'd made. On it, I posted what my PI had found: Catherine O'Malley's juvenile arrest record, a copy of her first marriage certificate, and the transcript of the interview with her brother detailing her history of manipulation. Just enough to plant the seed. The effect was immediate. My father, already paranoid about the financial investigation, now thought he had a snake in his own bed. I could just imagine the cold dinners, the accusations behind closed doors. Catherine, the master manipulator, would deny everything. But the seed was planted. Now when he looked at her, he wouldn't see his high society wife. He'd see a con artist's daughter. Their entire marriage, built on power and status, was now poisoned by distrust. The third step was the most delicate: breaking the alliance between Catherine and Clara. Clara was the key. She was the only one with a conscience, buried as it was. I knew Catherine saw Clara as a pawn, her claim to the sterling fortune. From another anonymous email, I sent a message to Clara. This one was different. It was designed to look like it came from a worried friend. The email laid out, with proof, how Catherine had systematically destroyed Clara's first serious relationship years ago. The boyfriend, an artist my father hated, had just disappeared. The email had screenshots of messages from a fake social media account Catherine had made, telling the boyfriend that Clara was just using him for fun. It was a classic Catherine move: subtle, cruel, and effective. For Clara, this was a betrayal that had nothing to do with me. It changed a painful memory. The boy she loved didn't abandon her. Her stepmother had surgically removed him from her life. The golden child, who never had to fight for anything, suddenly had a reason. The fights between Clara and Catherine became epic, according to my source on the household staff. Clara's perfect world was broken. She started questioning everything. The family was no longer a unit. It was 3 suspicious people trapped in a house together. I let them stew in that poison for months. My father's legal problems got worse. His marriage was a cold war. His relationship with his precious daughter was at its breaking point. They were isolated, paranoid, and turning on each other. It was time for the grand finale. In a desperate move to save his image, my father decided to host the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala. It was the society event of the year, his chance to project stability. It was the perfect stage. I didn't go. A ghost doesn't need a ticket. Instead, I sent my invitation to someone else, Arthur Vance. I sent him a first-class ticket, a new suit, and a simple note. It's time they remembered your name. The gala was in full swing. My father was on stage, starting his speech about legacy, integrity, and family values. Just then, Arthur Vance walked through the ballroom doors. He didn't make a scene, he just stood at the back of the room, but people noticed. Whispers spread like wildfire. The old guard remembered Arthur. His presence was a giant question mark hanging in the air. I watched it all on a live stream, my heart pounding. My father saw him. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw pure fear in his eyes. He stumbled over his words. At that exact moment, the journalist I'd tipped off got a new email from me. It had the final piece of the puzzle. A copy of the fraudulent buyout agreement my father had forced Arthur to sign. And one sentence. Ask Richard Sterling why Arthur Vance is here tonight. The journalist stood up. Her voice cut through the awkward silence. Mr. Sterling, a question. Can you comment on the circumstances of your original partner, Arthur Vance, leaving the company? The room went dead silent. My father just stared, his face white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was trapped. But the final blow didn't come from the journalist or from Arthur. It came from me, delivered by someone else. I had one secret left, the most explosive one, Clara's real father. I'd sent the info the day before, not to the press, but to Catherine's estranged brother, the bartender, along with a final payment and a simple instruction. Call your sister's husband during the gala. As my father stood frozen on stage, his phone, which was hooked up to the sound system for his presentation, started to ring. The name on the giant screen behind him was one he didn't recognize. Flustered, he instinctively answered it. The voice that boomed through the speakers was rough, angry, and very drunk. So, Richard, you finally figured out what a snake my sister is. Took you long enough. But before you get on your high horse, you might want to ask why she was so desperate to give you an heir. Maybe because she knew you couldn't have one of your own. Maybe you should ask her about Clara's real father. The one she was seeing behind your back before you were even married. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. All eyes shot from my father to Clara, who stood near the stage, her face a mask of horror. She looked at my father, then at Catherine, her mind imploding. And that's when my father, Richard Sterling, the master of control, finally snapped. The investigation, the paranoia, the public humiliation, it all exploded into pure rage. But he didn't aim it at the voice on the phone or at Catherine. He aimed it at the living symbol of his wife's betrayal. He turned to Clara, his face twisted into a snarl I'd never seen. He's right, he spat, his voice amplified by the mic, a venomous hiss that filled the room. You were never mine. You were her mistake. A debt I've been paying my entire life. The sound of Clara's heart shattering was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The world saw a billionaire publicly disown his daughter. But I knew the truth. He was confessing to a lifetime of psychological torture. In his attempt to destroy Clara, he confessed everything. The aftermath was total chaos. The Sterling name wasn't just tarnished, it was radioactive. The journalist had the story of a lifetime. Arthur Vance got his name back. Catherine was exposed as a fraud, and Clara was finally brutally free. They hadn't just lost their world. They had burned it down themselves. I just gave them the matches. For a long time after that night, I thought I was supposed to feel triumphant. I had won. I did exactly what I set out to do. The Sterling family, as the world knew it, was gone. My father was buried in lawsuits, his empire collapsing. Catherine vanished, probably looking for her next mark. Clara, after a while, reached out, not for an apology, but for the truth. I gave it to her, the whole ugly story, including the parts about our mother. It was a hard conversation, but it was real. For the first time, we were just two sisters, without the roles our family forced on us. We're not close today, but we're honest, and that's more than we ever had. But the feeling I had wasn't triumph. It was quiet. It was peace. I realized, sitting in my own small apartment, a place I earned myself, that my revenge was never really about destroying them. It was about freeing myself. For 10 years, my life was defined by what they did to me. That injustice was the center of my universe. By forcing the truth out into the open, I broke free from that orbit. I wasn't the ghost of the Sterling family anymore. I was just Alara. My real revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was the life I built while I was plotting. I have a career I'm proud of. I have friends who know the real me. I have a quiet life filled with small joys that are all mine. I didn't want back in, I wanted out. And now I was finally completely free. The greatest victory wasn't watching their world burn. It was realizing I had built my own world from the ashes, a world where my name was my own. They threw me out and tried to erase me, thinking their secrets were safe. They were wrong. I took the pain they gave me and forged it into a key that unlocked every secret they had. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below.